Everybody, welcome to RAG Masters, a new show about, you guessed it, Retrieval Augmented Generation. This will be a show about the interesting engineers that are pushing the science forward, about the businesses that are using it in an interesting way, and about the technology that we're all trying to get our arms around and figure out the future of RAG and Retrieval Augmented Generation. I am Neil Katz, a 20-year tech entrepreneur, as your host. With me as my co-host, Daniel Warfield, a data scientist, a RAG engineer in his own right, and a fantastic writer and educator who writes about how to use AI, how to build AI, and a lot about RAG and Retrieval Augmented Generation. Daniel, how are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm very excited to talk about this because I think this is a new and pressing topic.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. And I want to set the framework. This is our first show, and I want to explain to people what you're likely to get and what you're likely to not get in every episode of RAG Masters. So we feel like there isn't a show right now dedicated exclusively to Retrieval Augmented Generation and the growing community of engineers that's starting to build around this computer science practice. And there's just a lot of information out there, some of it good, some of it bad. Best practices, I think, are changing literally on a daily basis. There's new techniques. We want a place where RAG engineers feel like they can come together, learn, grow their own craft and practice, and hear about the best science, and also teach each other, and also just like hear about the really cool things that people are doing with this technology. And so like that's the core of it. We're also we're going to try to view the world through the lens of RAG and Retrieval Augmented Generation. Sometimes we're going to look at white papers that are exploring something new. That's actually what this episode will be about. We'll talk about that in a second. Sometimes we'll have guests on this show who are scientists or business leaders, but people who are deep in the field of RAG. Excuse me. And sometimes we'll address big news, like, for example, a new release from OpenAI or a new release from Google, but always through the lens of what it means for Retrieval Augmented Generation. Last thing I want to say, and then Daniel, you've been very patient. We're going to get you in here and we're going to talk about what we want to talk about today, which is an interesting topic for RAG. Both myself and Daniel, we work at a company called iLevel.ai, which is a company that makes tools to do advanced RAG in a way that has very few hallucinations and makes it very simple for engineers. That's the last plug you're going to hear, because this show isn't really about us, and we want to be fully transparent. So if there's a moment when we talk about our own technology or we talk about something that's kind of related to our business, we're just going to be really transparent and explicit about that. We look forward to having all kinds of guests on these shows, even guys, companies that are our competitors. We're totally cool with that, because the mission of the show is different than the mission of the company. The mission of the show is to help all of us together move forward and build better RAG applications. All right, that was a long wind-up, Daniel. How are you? I feel like you've aged 3 years listening to all that. How are you?
Yeah, I'm wrinkly. I'm older. No, I'm good, man. I'm good, and I'm super stoked because today we're talking about CRAG. You want to wind us up with CRAG?
Yeah, I mean, so Meta came out with this paper, just I think last week or 2 weeks ago. It was recent, within days. Meta's, is the company that put out the original RAG white paper in 2020. I got beef, by the way, with the marketing department at Meta, who named this practice RAG, which kind of sucks, because now we're all like, are we raggers? We're doing RAG. It's like it's kind of not the best. Not the best. Now they have a new paper coming out, which makes it even worse. It's called CRAG, which is a series of benchmarks to help you build better RAG applications. But I want to leave my explanation there. What's your take on the main thrust of this paper? What is CRAG, and what are the important points that people really need to know at a top level? Then we're going to get into like what it does and how it works and rip it apart and what it's not good for, and get into all the good stuff.
All right, let's get into it. So CRAG is comprehensive RAG. It is a benchmark by Meta, and Meta being the people who invented RAG. The original research for RAG came out of Meta in the first place. So CRAG is the comprehensive RAG benchmark. And the idea is it's a fairly large set of questions. I think it's like 7,000 questions or something like that. Is it 4,000? I can't remember. Oh, 4,409. It's 4,409 question answer pairs. And it's across a variety of domains, a variety of question types, and also a variety of problems. Basically, the whole idea of CRAG is they want to take the existing problems of existing RAG approaches and the existing problems of existing language models and wrap them into a single and holistic data set that current industry standard and state-of-the-art approaches don't do well at, so that hopefully they can accelerate the state-of-the-art forward. Basically, the way they do that is they have a bunch of questions and answers. So they looked at a bunch of data, they created a bunch of questions and a bunch of answers, and then they have a bunch of data that can be used to answer those questions. So your classic RAG sort of application, right? You have a bunch of documents and you have questions, so then you want answers based on the documents and the existing language model. So that's what they did. They have a large curated data set. Sorry, what's up?
I'm just going to put it up here for everybody. Here's like the basic RAG setup here. Obviously, most folks who are familiar with RAG, why don't you just give me like the 30 seconds on what is RAG, how does it work, and then how does this benchmark, test it in ways that try to break it?
Yeah, so Retrieval Augmented Generation, it's actually exactly what RAG is. It's kind of an interesting topic because now we're getting into the academics, so you can kind of mess around with this definition a little bit. But the layman's definition and the most common definition of RAG is that you have something called a retrieval engine. Our company, we build retrieval engines. There's also a variety of other retrieval engines. Basically, you stick documents into some document store, and then you somehow summarize them. And usually that's used with something called an encoder. You turn it into a vector that somehow represents the meaning of a section of a document. Then what you do is you ask this retrieval system questions. You say, hey, I want to know about Spain. So you ask about Spain, and then after you've asked about Spain, you take hey, where is Spain? You take that question, where is Spain, and you turn it into a vector. Right. And then you compare all of your sections of documents with your question to find the sections of documents that are the most relevant to your question. And that's what's called retrieval. The whole idea of RAG is you can take the relevant documents that you found and stick them into a prompt so that you can ask a language model, hey, I want to know about Spain, but also you can inject basically the information that you retrieved about Spain. So you create like this basically prompt that has not only your question, but all of the relevant chunks of documents that the retrieval system thinks is relevant to the question. You pass that to a language model for generation. That's RAG in a nutshell. Hopefully a lot of engineers here already kind of know that. But yeah.
So, okay, so that's RAG. Now talk to me about CRAG and the questions that they're asking, the types of questions that we have here actually up on the screen that are really designed actually to give RAG trouble. This is like the bad news bears list of questions that just kind of break a lot of RAG systems. Walk us through some of these. You don't have to read this slide like it's like we're in like a business meeting with PowerPoint, but like walk us through some of the goodies here of things that will tend to trip up a RAG system. And I think Ben has been pretty clever here in the kinds of questions they're asking.
Yeah. So, all right. So again, the whole idea of RAG is you take sets of documents, you summarize them as a vector, you take your question, you summarize it as a vector, then you find relevant chunks of documents that answer your question so that then you can generate an answer based on those documents that are relevant to your question. That's like the naive fundamental approach to RAG.
Yeah.
But that has some implicit problems, right? Like, what if your question has to do with multiple sources of information, right? What if your question has to do with Spain and France and Portugal and whatever? Maybe the vector that you use to encode your question, maybe that summarization, maybe it doesn't perfectly encapsulate your need to look at a lot of different information. So then the retrieval that you get won't include all the information. That's that aggregate, multi-hop. When you have a variety of information that you need to answer a question, that's a big problem with existing RAG solutions.
Right.
Also, like if you're just summarizing your question as a vector, like what if there's logic that needs to happen before you really get to the essence of your question? So maybe you're asking about a specific thing, but really, like if you think about it conceptually, before you get the relevant chunks of documents to that question, what you should do is you should figure out what the question's really asking and then get the relevant chunks of documents, which existing RAG solutions to a large extent don't do. And there's a variety of other ones not listed here. There's questions that have like temporal changes. There's a variety of complex problem types that are addressed in CRAG. And it's basically a bunch of people in a bunch of industrial settings, like industry and also research. They came together to find all of the problems that RAG have, and then they attempted to build a comprehensive test around that. And that's what CRAG is.
Yeah. And so walk me through how an engineer might implement CRAG. Can you use this on your own projects? How useful is a benchmark is it? And then we'll get into, in this white paper, how well common systems, RAG systems did with CRAG, and the answer is not very well. But we'll get into that in a minute. But how would you, as an engineer, could you take this off the shelf? Could you download the data set and do something with it? What are you getting?
Yeah, so right now there's a competition, kind of like a Kaggle style competition, and they have like demo notebooks. It's kind of interesting. They rolled out CRAG in like
it's right here.
I think
30 seconds left to get in there. If any RAG engineer wants to pull an all-nighter, I think you can still get in. But literally, there's like 2 or 3 days left. So sorry about that. This is not breaking news on the front of this. It's breaking news on the back. But go ahead. What's the competition? How does this work?
Yeah. So basically, the idea is they broke up CRAG into 3 sections, and I believe I have the sections here. Let me look up CRAG paper.
If I remember, the first batch was they would give you for every question they would give you 5 HTML pages as the potential source material. In the second batch, they would give you 50 HTML pages as the potential source material. And the third one, they gave you a knowledge graph. I think they gave you the 50 HTML pages and the knowledge graph, which had several million entities in it. And so it's increasingly difficult to find needle or needles in haystack, is how I read it. But you tell me what your take is. Is that the right take or
yeah, so I don't. They released a lot, right? So off the top of my, and it's actually ironic because the whole point of RAG is that it's hard to know everything. So there's kind of like a meta thing going on here. But yeah, they released question answer pairs that have.
Would we be HAG, by the way, like human augmented generation, when you're just trying to figure out something yourself? I think we're HAG.
Yeah, we're HAGs.
To make this even worse.
Hair is playing out. But yeah, so. Like they broke up CRAG into multiple sections. Some of them you have question answer pairs with basically the top 50 search results in HTML pages. And that's just like, you can think of that as like an atomic example, right? So you have a question answer and then 50 HTML pages. They also provide mock knowledge graphs. So a knowledge graph is kind of like the standard way to represent complex information on the internet in an interconnected way. They expose those so that you can attempt to retrieve information from a knowledge graph. They also provide mock APIs so that basically if you have a question, you can ask this API specific question. And essentially what they're doing here is they're giving you many ways to retrieve information. You can either just get a block of text as HTML, you can have knowledge graphs, you can have mock APIs. And I think this is kind of an extension of that comprehensiveness. There's a variety of angles that they're approaching this problem. And because a diversity in how you retrieve information is really important. Now, I do want to mention something really quickly, because I think this is a really interesting and important topic. So the reason they're using knowledge graphs is actually because I think there's a subtle distinction between what kind of industry sees RAG as and what academia sees RAG as. I think there's actually they're sort of complementary, but they're a little bit different from one another. And I think it's really important to really understand CRAG and why it's important. I think it's really important to understand that difference. So the original paper, the original RAG paper it has a long name. What is it? Retrieval Augmented.
You need HAG to figure this out.
Yeah, we need HAG. The original RAG paper was Retrieval Augmented Generation for Knowledge-Intensive NLP Tasks, right? So,
catchy.
Yeah, very catchy. And maybe it's good that we turned into RAG. But so like the sort of the current industry, the way people apply RAG, they think of RAG as a way to inject documents into a model so that it can be applied to problem-specific applications, right? If you want to use your language model for your company, you can use RAG to inject your company information into the language model so that the language model knows about your company so that you can build products around it. That's like when you talk to like a RAG engineer, that's their conceptualization of RAG and why it's important. When you talk to a researcher about RAG, it's a little bit different. The RAG paper, it doesn't really focus on this idea of knowledge portability, which I think is where a lot of RAG engineers kind of find RAG to be really important. They really focus on robustness and just the performance generally. So the RAG paper, it inherits a long line of modeling strategies that attempt to combine knowledge and parameterized knowledge together. So you have the parameterized knowledge in the model. You have like a language model.
The language model. The model's trained on the public internet. It's eaten the internet.
Yeah, but the problem with these parameterized language models is they suck. They're really cool and they're really useful, but there's been a lot of research. They're bad at recalling specific information. The RAG paper references a really fantastic paper called How Knowledgeable Are Large Language Models? And running GPT-4 on very common problems on specific information. They're called head queries. They're very common queries. It achieved like 47% accuracy in this particular use case. But when you applied the same language model to torso and tail, so less common queries, the language model was much less performant. So like language models from an academic perspective, by themselves, this parameterized strategy of expecting the language model to just memorize a bunch of information. It seems like the research suggests that they're not very good at that. And that's not really what they're good at. So the whole point of RAG was to say, hey, so we have a language model that's good at language, but it's bad at knowing individual ideas.
Not a fact machine necessarily.
Exactly.
People are using it as a fact machine. I mean, that's, everyone thinks it's a search engine, but arguably that might be maybe not what it was born for.
And that goes exactly to the name of RAG, which is are they as good as knowledge graphs, right? Like for knowledge intensive tasks, right? So the whole point of RAG, it wasn't to enable knowledge portability. The original point of RAG and kind of the predominant conceptualization in literature is to improve performance and make them better because they're not very good at knowing specific details. So it's kind of important to mention, if you look at CRAG in terms of retrieving general information, you might be like, why are they giving us 50 HTML pages? Like, doesn't that defeat the purpose? You're doing the retrieval for us. Or like, why are you giving us this knowledge graph or these APIs? Like, you're doing retrieval for us. You're kind of undermining RAG.
They've done a lot of the RAG functions. They went and, like, typically when you think about RAG, is your first problem is, how do you ingest the data? Where's the data? How do you ingest it? Like, they've already done it. They went and found, they created the question and answer. They created the answers. They created a knowledge graph of them in HTML pages. So like problem one solved. And it's like, how do you search it? Well, they kind of tell you how to search it, right? So they're doing a lot of what you would normally think is the job of RAG. So what exactly do they let you do that's left for the engineer to try to prove themselves and also to maybe benchmark their own applications?
Yeah, so what's left to do is the performant aspect of RAG, right? So they've already retrieved 50 HTML pages.
Yeah.
But in CRAG, they applied those 50 ML pages. They did naive RAG. So they just injected that information into the language model itself. Basically, you give it a question. You say, hey, here's 50 HTML pages. And then you give it a question. You go, hey, answer my question. Yeah. And like it didn't really work very well. They saw like 30. Yeah. They achieved 34% or 44% accuracy on simple RAG, and then on advanced RAG, and advanced RAG being like Copilot Pro, Gemini Advanced, ChatGPT Plus, and Perplexity AI. These like really high-end systems, they only achieved 63% on this, pretty trivial data. And what's kind of cool about this data set is it's, to a large extent, I believe, publicly available internet. So this is information.
It's Brave searches from a Brave browser, right? So it's all in theory available to a Bing AI search or a Google AI search, or even for the training models in general to just eat the internet.
Yeah. So these search engines can see this data. In theory, the language models have already been trained on this data,
right?
But they suck at these questions. They're not that good, right? So that's really we're 21 minutes in, and that's the essence of CRAG.
I'm just want to ask more. Like, what do if I want to use this as a RAG engineer myself, like, can I use it? And if so, what would I use it for? This CRAG?
Yeah. So,
or is this more like for Facebook to use as an academic tool?
So as an academic tool, it's absolutely amazing. It's really cool because it really, I think, it's enough anchored into the existing literature where researchers can really think about it, but it's cutting edge enough where I think it'll really propel the state of the art forward.
Okay.
I think if you're a RAG engineer, you can certainly use CRAG, but it is kind of constrained, right? It's around knowledge graphs. They've already done HTML retrievals. It's very academic. It's not very flexible to like, oh, if you have this use case, then it'll be, reasonable. It's kind of ironic, like, because it's so constrained, but it's also broad. They're trying to push the general state of the art forward, not your specific company's RAG system forward, right? So you certainly can use CRAG. If you 50 HTML pages can be a lot of information. And if you're kind of experimenting with a RAG system, you can certainly port CRAG over. Also, CRAG has really good tooling around auto evaluation. So the paper is fantastic in how they talk about.
They snuck that in. That could be its own white paper, basically. I mean, how to eval RAG is a hot, fiery topic of which I don't think anyone's really nailed it. Lots of startups are pursuing it. And they just flipped that in. They just sort of in the back of this paper, but they said, hey, we built one, but we're not going to exactly tell you what we built or how we did it, but it works really well. Also, there's CRAG. Let's go back to the main topic.
Yeah, and it's, now we're getting into academia. They did kind of talk about it, but it wasn't the point of the paper, so they didn't go in like crazy. Yeah. Essentially, what they used is I think one of the big things is they used automatic evaluation. So they have question answer pairs that are curated by humans. And then the RAG system comes up with its own answer. And then they ask a language model, hey, is this answer right based on this answer? What they did, though, is probably they formatted the answers to be easily falsifiable. That's a pretty common step. And they did a lot of curation in terms of the question answer pairs. Also, interestingly, they avoided something called the self-preference problem. When a language model outputs something, and then you ask the same language model, did you do a good job? They have a tendency to just like what they have said, kind of like what a person would do, right? Even if I'm wrong and I'm listening to exactly what I said, it kind of makes sense in my head almost. So they actually, they used a variety of language models, and they had several language models evaluate. And I think they used like an aggregate score. That's how they did their evaluation. And it was pretty impressive. I've done automatic evaluation. We've done automatic evaluation. It's not impossible, but getting it to be really performant is kind of tricky. And they mentioned that they achieved like 97% similarity. I think it was a really high number.
Verified by humans.
Yeah.
Which I think is important to note, that they kept the human in the loop, which is what we've done as well. We've found that the first pass is pretty good, but if you want perfect, unfortunately, auto eval, you still need human eval at the end of it to actually check the homework of the robot checking the homework.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So, all right. So what's the I guess one future point is it's a contest. There's going to be a winner. We'll follow up with that in a couple of days. I don't know if we'll do a full episode about it unless the winner does something truly spectacular, but we'll certainly update on social about who the winner is. But beyond that, what do you think about maybe the future benchmarks that you'd like to see to help all of us build better RAG applications? Because CRAG is a piece of that puzzle, but a clever piece, by the way. I love that they just fill it with stumpers. But what else would you like to see as an active participant in the field?
I think CRAG is amazing, and I think
you're
it's
dreamy on CRAG now, huh?
Everywhere. Yeah, it's
dreamy.
I think CRAG is. I do. I think CRAG is really cool. Yeah, we're gonna go. I'm gonna let it climb up by my hair up into my tower.
Style. Very nice.
And it'll sweep me away. No, I think CRAG is really cool. I think if there's anything it's missing, it's parsing. It does it uses fairly simple data. In being you can only be so comprehensive. I think they did an amazing job, and I think it really does take a lot of hints and really is well nestled within the academic community. But from a practical perspective, when you're doing RAG on random PDF files and some guy's YouTube video and whatever, right? And that's a whole separate ball game that adds a lot of confusion into this. That's kind of what we do to a large extent.
It is. And that would be my criticism, actually, or critique of it, which is, the real world of RAG is the real world, and the real world is made of, like a universe of edge cases, essentially. Documents are crazy, content's weird, questions are weird. I mean, it's not quite as perfect a universe, I think, as they've made. I do admire that they've kind of ignored that problem. They just said, real world problems, it's not kind of what we're doing in this paper. We really just want to work on these types of questions designed to mess up RAG, and let's see if we can do some, the community can build engineering around that. That's totally necessary. But I also feel like there's a universe of data engineering problems in real world RAG with real company data that this just completely ignores by saying, hey, we've given you 50 perfect HTML files that are bound to contain the answer. That's not how it really works.
Yeah, and they do kind of address that. They focus on realistic questions and realistic answers, and to some extent realistic noise and realistic use cases. They do have a type of questions which is there is no answer. So that is included in the data set. They have elements of that. But for the general sentiment, I completely agree. When you're applying RAG to a real world setting, the way the industry thinks of RAG rather than the academic side thinks of RAG, there's a lot of problems. I think from the academic perspective, they're like, all right, first we have to figure out performance before we get into all this crazy mumbo jumbo. But I think this conversation makes me really excited about the next benchmark, because if these problems can get figured out, then we can sort of move on to the next domain. And actually, I think this is a great remark. The CRAG paper references. No, actually, it's the RAG paper. The reason that it inspired it was one of the papers it references was from the next decade in AI, which basically that whole paper is talking about how robustness in intelligence is really the next domain, getting past this idea of this paper says pointillistic intelligence, where it's just kind of it knows some things, but it's completely off on other things, or it works in some use cases, but it doesn't work on other use cases. This sort of hazy, sometimes it works, whatever AI. I think a lot of the industry is getting away from that. And I think that's really kind of the step CRAG is making, and I think it's in the right direction.
Well, I'm just looking forward to whatever they name this next paper, maybe BRAG. That would probably be a good one. But it's going to be something bad like frag, flag. It's just going to get worse from here. I think it's going to get worse. But I'm an optimist. Good things will happen. So that is our first episode of RAG Masters in the can. Thank you, Daniel, very much for being with me. To the audience, we hope you found this useful. We'll be doing a lot more. Of course, like and subscribe as always. But more importantly, leave us comments. We want to hear how this was useful or not to you, and how we can make it better. And that's all for now. Thank you, everybody. See you next time on RAG Masters.